Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Nolan Huffman. Thanks for joining us tonight for East Texas in Focus. Let's get started. Tonight, we're focusing on the results of the recent primary runoff elections. The political landscape in Texas may have changed in a major way. Republicans making their choice in one of the state's biggest political showdowns, with Attorney General Ken Paxton defeating longtime U.S. Senator John Cornyn. The results sending shockwaves through both parties ahead of November. Paxton now turns his attention to his Democratic opponent, State Rep James Talarico. Tonight, we're going to focus on what the results say about the direction of the Republican Party, how Democrats are seeing maybe a new opening, and what all could mean for voters here in East Texas and, of course, across our state. Tristan Van Beem followed the race closely just on election night, speaking with East Texas Democrats as they get ready for an uphill battle.
Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton was able to pull away in the runoff election versus incumbent Senator John Cornyn, gaining 64% of the vote.
Without your love, your support, and your prayers, we would not be here tonight.
Now Paxton is turning his attention immediately after this victory to James Talarico, the state representative from Austin and his Democratic opponent.
My opponent is the most extreme radical the Democrats have ever nominated. James Talarico is a threat to everything we hold dear in this state and in this country.
And is trying to keep alive a nearly 4-decade-long streak of having a Republican in the Senate seat.
Policy for policy, Ken Paxton against James Talarico is a slam dunk.
A Texas-sized task for Talarico, considering Paxton won every county in Texas except 2. However, the Nacogdoches Democratic Party says a Paxton matchup gives Talarico a better chance in the general election.
Ken Paxton is the most corrupt politician in Texas, and James Talarico, he's all about helping the common man.
And gives East Texas Democrats more hope of seeing their party represented, not just in Texas, but also at the federal level.
The same old has gotten us nowhere, and so people want a change, and I hope to be a part of that change.
General Election Day is set for November 3rd.
That was Tristan Van Beem with that report for us. Following the election results, I had the opportunity to sit down with both Republican and Democrat party chairs from Smith County to hear their thoughts on those final numbers we saw and the matchup and challenges ahead of November during the midterms. We begin with the Smith County Republican Party Chair David Stein. Here's a part of that conversation. Your reaction to the pretty decisive victory from Ken Paxton?
It was. A number of friends who were supporters of Paxton's were telling me 5%, 10%. I think we can get that. I don't know who saw this decisive of a victory for it. What's interesting, and I guess we can dive right into it, but when you look at the numbers of who voted in the primary and who voted here. So Senator Cornyn had about 910,000 votes in the primary, and Attorney General Paxton had 880. Yesterday, Paxton voters were shy of 500,000, and Paxton had almost the same number of votes. So people were supporting the candidate Ken Paxton, and where Wesley Hunt's votes went, we don't really know. I'm sure data analytics will come out about that, but the stark thing was that usually you see a drop-off in the number of voters, and for Paxton to maintain almost the exact number of votes he had in the runoff as he did in primary, that was the difference maker, as Cornyn's dropped almost in half.
Did the president's endorsement of Paxton make a difference at all, or do you think voters' minds were already made up after that March primary?
So my take is both, and for 2 reasons. One is anytime you get an endorsement from a president, in particular like President Trump, it makes a difference. So even though early voting had already started, it was at the very beginning of it, so it could have affected some. In runoff voting, you're voting for a candidate. So you're really, I don't know people who would have voted for Cornyn in the primary and then switched and voted for Paxton in the runoff. I'm not sure how much that affected it, but it doesn't hurt. And I'm sure there were folks who may have been Wesley Hunt voters who were not really sure, and that could have pushed them over the edge. But it's certainly his endorsements all across the state last night made an impact.
Now, for sure. Why do you think voters decided to move on from John Cornyn? I think he's been in office since 2002, I think, here in Texas. And also, what's his legacy going to be here in the Lone Star State?
Well, I think as people dive into his legacy, and usually after an election, the rhetoric dies down. you will find that he's done quite a lot for Texans and the passionate Paxton voters who maybe haven't been involved politically for a long time don't understand that. For example, when President Trump in his first term, Trump 45, when those 3 Supreme Court justices got nominated, Cornyn was the chief of the Senate Judiciary Committee and ran point getting all those endorsements across. So I hope it's kind to him, and regardless, I hope people respect those that serve in office. But Ken Paxton is viewed as a fighter. And if you look at how President Trump came back and won, he fights for us. He understands us. He gets us. And that's what the Texas voters feel about Ken Paxton, is that this guy is fearless. I mean, he's withstood a lot of heat. He's still in the battle. He campaigns hard. He is great with the detail. He was effective when he was in the Texas Senate, the Texas House before, but they believe that Ken Paxton fights for him, and that's what people want to see in Washington. They don't want somebody just to go along with everybody else's. Bring Texas opinions to Washington.
Of course, he goes on, takes on James Talarico, who's a representative there in Austin district. Some people said Paxton now, I guess you can, some people have said makes Republicans vulnerable going into the November elections with some of Paxton's baggage from the past. Where's your stance on that? Do you think some lawmakers on Capitol Hill are worried with Paxton winning this last night?
Well, I'm sure that they are. And what I'm finding is when I look at Talarico, let's look at the body of work. What does this guy believe? What does he talk about? God is non-binary. There are 6 genders. There's some stuff that he says that is pretty far out. Now, get all that aside. Look at his voting record. He votes far to the extreme left, straight down the line in the Texas Senate. That's where he's been. And Texas voters rejected that. They resoundingly endorsed and voted for President Trump. So I think that when you start exposing records, they're going to attack Paxton where they think he's vulnerable, but it's not on his record. And that's going to be a tough way to see where Texas voters go. Do you have someone who may be considered a flawed candidate, but yet he's solid on policy? That's where I would go.
If there was Cornyn voters or maybe more moderate Republicans that will not vote for Paxton, or they wouldn't have voted for him last night or even in the March primary, how can Paxton possibly win them over? Or even some independent voters that really don't know where they're voting right now, how can he do that going into November? That's probably going to be critical.
It is, and I think that he's going to have to reach out to those solid Cornyn voters, whatever communities that all of those exist into. Those people that had questions about the character, maybe they voted for Cornyn strictly on character or because he's been there so long. He's going to have to make that case, no question about it. But he's also got to present, we have 2 choices. And if Senator Cornyn was your first choice, you now have 2 choices left. You have Ken Paxton, you have James Talarico. And clearly, for any Republican voter, we've got to make sure that we support the guy from our party that came up, because policy for policy, Ken Paxton against James Talarico is a slam dunk. This is absolutely, Paxton is going to carry the party priorities very strongly, but Talarico represents somebody that is far, far left, that is not mainstream Texas voters.
And then finally, I want to get your thoughts. Of course, a lot of people are talking about gas prices, the conflict with Iran, and really not happy, maybe on, well, definitely both sides, Democrats, Republicans, independents, you name it, not too happy with some of the stuff going on in Washington, no matter what you say is causing that. How do Republicans maybe gain back some momentum? It seems like Democrats are trying to steal that momentum with all the stuff happening in Washington. What can they do to make sure they keep that majority on Capitol Hill?
What got President Trump in office were the kitchen table issues. And gas prices were one of them. And they came way down, and then with the war, they've popped back up. So I think that's critical. I think if we can get things settled in the war in Iran, and if we can get gas prices back down, I think that will be a huge, huge move to help in November. Incumbent presidents traditionally never do well in midterms. So not to set up an expectation of failure, but that is the reality. People vote angry. People vote against. So our Republican base has to stay strong and stay solid.
Then finally, David, really quickly, I want to get your thoughts on the Texas Attorney General race to replace Ken Paxton. Now, Mace Middleton winning that pretty handily over Chip Roy. Your thoughts on him? If somebody doesn't know much about Mace Middleton, what can he bring to the table if he wins in November?
So he is a strong conservative. He's also a strong businessman. And when you look at the Attorney General's office, it's a business. His job, you know, the Attorney General is not the one that goes in and tries all the cases. The Attorney General's job is to hire the best lawyers that he can find for that staff, and they do the research. They do the hard, heavy lifting on that. The Attorney General, a lot of it is a management, yet a legal position as well. So he's going to be very strong. He's going to be strong on the social issues. He's a guy that has had bandwidth and the potential to make a run at a congressional seat, to go to Washington. His heart is in Texas, and in particular for Tyler voters, they might want to know he married a Tyler girl, so he's got some roots here.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. David Stein, thanks so much.
My pleasure.
As always, we always appreciate having you on.
Thank you.
All right, that's a great start tonight. When we come back with East Texas in Focus, we're going to hear from Democrats on what James Talarico has to do if he wants to beat Ken Paxton this fall. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're focusing on the Texas primary runoff results, where one race is already reshaping the political conversation across the state, potentially the nation. Attorney General Ken Paxton's challenge against longtime Senator John Cornyn has exposed a deep divide inside the Republican Party between the party establishment and those aligned with President Donald Trump. Now the attention's turned to November, when Paxton's going to face against the polls with Democratic nominee James Talarico. Following the latest election results, we also had the opportunity to talk to East Texas party chairs. Earlier in the show, we heard from the Republicans. I also had the chance to speak with Cam Ray, who's the Democratic Party chair in Smith County as well. She tells me it's time for the voters to throw their support behind their nominee. I want to ask you about that, of course, that race. Were you surprised it was that much of a blowout from Paxton going against Cornyn? It wasn't really close.
Yes, it wasn't really close. I was surprised. You know, Cornyn's been around for so long, but I think the endorsement from Trump to Ken Paxton really pushed that one over the edge, particularly in this area. And I think Paxton won all of East Texas. He won all but 2 counties in East Texas. What do you think was the main thing for Cornyn and why people decided to move on from him, just as from a Democratic perspective here? So I think that he was viewed, because he'd been around for so long and had made negotiations on both sides of the aisle, I think they kind of viewed that as someone who would cave to the Democrats occasionally, and they didn't, and the Republicans weren't interested in fielding that kind of candidate. It's concerning with Ken Paxton's background, that they were able to field that type of candidate, but I think that's kind of the environment that we're in these days.
And then, of course, the big thing now, Talarico going against Paxton. Texans have not elected a Democrat to the Senate here since 1988. That is a long time. Yeah. How does your party look to possibly change that? Would you say you guys are in an uphill battle? I would imagine, since the last time was 1988. But yeah. but what are you guys looking at right now?
Well, it's definitely an uphill battle. The good thing is Talarico is a really strong candidate. He has a lot of background that I think East Texans can be interested in once they find out more about him. I think he's the most likely candidate we've had since 1988 to be elected to a state office or a federal office for Texas. You know, we've been in that Texas Republican cycle for 30, 40 years now, since Ann Richards, and I think it's really interesting. The good thing is Talarico is up on a Ken Paxton candidacy in the polls, which is great, and it is outside the margin even for James Talarico.
What makes Talarico maybe, depending on what happens, in November, but what makes you guys really confident right now? His background, some of his other stuff he's done in the past. What makes him possibly the best candidate compared to other people that you guys are maybe optimistic in the past to win in November for this U.S. Senate seat?
Yeah, so when James Talarico has a lot of great ideas that we really believe in. He was a teacher, so he has that background, and he comes from that understanding with being a teacher, and where teachers come from, teacher salaries, things like that. So education is important to him. He's also a seminary student, and that is something, East Texas is the Bible Belt, and we definitely want a strong Christian candidate, and he provides that also, but he's also a progressive, so I feel like that really helps us too, is he kind of meets a lot of the categories across the board for Democrats.
Yeah, what do you make of some of the Republican attacks going on right now for some of Talarico's past comments? And he seemed to walk back some of those comments yesterday. I think he did an interview with CBS News. I'm not going to say walk back, but he seemed to say he misspoke or something along those lines. I'm not going to quote him directly, but what do you make of those attacks and what Talarico might have said yesterday after he knew who he was facing?
Yeah, I think the attacks are completely commonplace, particularly in this type of race that's going to be so fierce. I think the attacks are not going to stop throughout this campaign. I think it's going to be really strong on the Paxton side, and I think that's the aggressive type of race he needs to run. I don't necessarily feel like Talarico's walking back some of what he had to say earlier, but he's definitely becoming more considered about what he needs to say going forward.
How can Talarico possibly convince some East Texas, maybe independents here, obviously heavily Republican here in East Texas, very hard to win as a Democrat, but how can he maybe convince some people that are maybe slightly Republican independent to vote for him in November? What do you think he has to do on that front?
I think he needs to continue to express his moderate side. He needs to continue to let these Republicans that are questionable now that Cornyn is not in the race and the independents know who he is as a person, because I think he's a really strong candidate, and I think his campaign, it really does reach out to people across the board. There is a space in his campaign for everyone, even the Republicans and even the independents who are concerned about the direction that Texas has been heading and the way that the country is heading.
And then finally, Camp, like you were mentioning, it seems like a lot of Democrats out there feel they have some momentum with high gas prices right now and the conflict with Iran, which is dragging on. How can you guys seem to take some of that momentum going into the November elections, no matter what happens with the gas prices and even if the conflict comes to an end weeks from now?
Yeah, and those are things that we're looking at, but that's not going to be the key of our campaigns. Our campaigns are about connecting with the people and what we can do with our candidates for the regular people. Just making sure that we're addressing the cost of living, housing, health care. Those are the things that people really care about. Gas prices come and go and will always be up and down. So those are, that impacts the cost of living, but it's not the core of our candidacy or our races. It is something that's I don't think we're going to look at it for a long-term strategy. And the Iran war is, again, something that we're hoping that Congress is going to be able to step in and handle really soon. That's our goal for that. But again, it's really addressing the candidates and what we can do for everyday people, what we present and what the Democratic Party stands for in making our country better, and Texas especially, with health care and education, which are two areas that we really struggle in as a state.
All right, when we come back, we're going to take a look at the results for other very important statewide races affecting everyday life for East Texans. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. Tonight, Texas Republicans also choosing their next Attorney General nominee. Galveston State Senator Mays Middleton defeating U.S. Congressman Chip Roy from Austin in a hard-fought GOP runoff. After pouring nearly $17 million of his own money into the race, Middleton campaigned as a close President Trump ally. He now heads to November with the ballot there, where he's going to square off against Democratic State Senator Nathan Johnson from Dallas. Last night, Johnson was also in a runoff race against his opponent, Joe Jaworski. Johnson ended up winning with about 61% of the vote. Democratic voters have also decided who will face off against Texas Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick, who holds the second highest executive position in our state. This race was between Vicky Goodwin and Marcos Velez. Goodwin won this race with 68% of the vote. Finally, after 100% of precincts now reporting, Beau French heading to the November ballot after defeating incumbent Jim Wright in that Republican runoff for a seat on the Texas Railroad Commission. French, who's campaigning to expand oil and gas development in Texas and streamline the permitting process, edged out Wright in one of the night's closest races. The powerful three-member commission oversees Texas oil and gas regulation. Each member serves a staggered 6-year term. French now faces against Democrat John Rosenthal in November. Democrats across several East Texas counties also making their voices heard in who they believe should challenge Republican Congressman Nathaniel Moran in November. 2 Democrats were on the ballot hoping to become the next U.S. rep from Texas's 1st congressional district. Results now show Yolanda Prince defeating Dax Alexander with 72% of the vote. This runoff race was the second time these 2 opponents faced off for this nomination. The primary election ended with both finishing in the top 2 in what was a race of 4 at one point. In March, Prince led Alexander 45% to 22%. And since that runoff was announced, both have continued to spread their message to Democrats here in the Piney Woods. Prince says she's definitely ready for the general election.
I am so ready for this campaign. I am so ready for this general election in November because I've pretty much been preparing for this all my life, and this is a lifelong dream to do that and serve my community in as an elected official. And so I need y'all to come out again in the polls because one of my strategies.
In her challenge, Dax Alexander's main message to voters after the results was thanking people for supporting him in the runoff race and during the original primary period. Texas Democrats living in our state's 5th congressional district also choosing their candidate for November to challenge U.S. Congressman Lance Gooden of East Texas. Under our state's new congressional map, District 5 now covers all of Henderson, Kaufman, Van Zandt, and Wood counties, as well as parts of Dallas and Upshur counties. Final results show Chelsea Hockett taking that Democrat nomination for this race with 53% of the vote. All right, in just a couple of minutes, closing thoughts on this week's topic here on your Saturday. Well, the Texas primary runoff may now be over, but the political battle ahead is only beginning. Ken Paxton's victory over John Cornyn marks a major shift inside the Republican Party, signaling the continued strength of the state's conservative grassroots and the influence of President Donald Trump within Texas politics. Now the stage set for what could become one of the most closely watched Senate races in the country. Ken Paxton facing Democratic challenger James Talarico this November. 2 candidates with sharply different visions for Texas in a race it's expected to draw national attention, major money, and intense debate over the future direction of the state here. We'll continue, of course, following every development in the weeks and months ahead for you. And for all of us here tonight, thanks so much for watching. Next week, we're going to zero on much more issues here in East Texas. Have a great Saturday.